So here I'm just selecting a piece of copper. I got this copper from cutting up actually just copper fittings. So I've picked a piece of copper, but it needs to be cut a little bit more to straighten it out, and that's what I'm doing. And so these are just 10 snips that I've bought off of Amazon. I'll link those in the description. So now I'm using a raising hammer. This one has a specific texture on it that I wanted, and so if you just turn it back and forth and you hold the hammer in the same direction, it gets relatively the same pattern, very uniform looking pattern. It's pretty nice. So here I'm just making the ends a little bit nicer, rounding them off so that they're not so square, because I'm going to wrap this ring. And so I'm cutting those with the same 10 snips, and then I'm going to keep on making that texture. Actually, that texture, if you hit the sides of the ring as well, it helps. It just makes it a little bit nicer. So this hammer, this other hammer that I'm using now, this rawhide hammer, I'm using that just to flatten it out so I can continue to add texture, because as you add texture, it actually raises the middle up, as you can see, and then it makes it a little bit harder to keep adding texture. So you just use the rawhide hammer to hammer that out. And the reason why I use the rawhide hammer is so that you don't get more tool marks in it that you don't want, aside from the raising hammer. So after you use the raising hammer here, the next tool that you use is just to kind of shape it. And it's a ring. They're called ring makers. They have nylon jaws, and basically what it does is it turns it into a ring shape, in other words. And then this is a ring mandrel, and what this does is it helps you decide the size of the ring, but it also helps you to downsize the ring, as you can hammer it to more of the smaller, tapered side of the ring mandrel. The hammer that I'm using now is just a rubber mallet. It's relatively the same process as the rawhide hammer. So now I'm just using my fingers to kind of shape it a little bit better, because even though you get basically the size, you still need to shape it to the shape that you're looking for. After trying it on, I decided I needed to actually cut some of those ends a little bit thinner so that it felt more comfortable on your finger. And that's what I'm doing here with the same 10 snips. So after you kind of get this shape, and sometimes it takes a little bit, and this one is actually a little bit of a bigger ring, and that's why it's taking a little bit longer. But after you kind of get this shape, then what you do is you decide if there's any other shaping needed, or if it's time to polish. I think as you can see, this took a little bit longer to shape, to get that shape perfectly so that it fit nicely. These are just nylon pliers, and the reason why you use nylon pliers, the reason why you use nylon everything is so that you don't make extra tool marks that you don't want. If you were to use metal pliers, you would effectively mar the texture that you've given it. So now what this is here is I'm using now a block of clay, and this clay is basically a fine grit, and it polishes all the sharp edges and kind of removes any grime or anything that's on there, but without really marring the texture or anything of the ring. And I'm using this now to kind of clean this up before I give it a little bit of color, and also take out some of the cutting marks from the 10 snips. And I'll also link that in the description as well. This tool here is basically just a grinding wheel. It's got two sides, and actually this one I think is made for jewelers. It's relatively cheap compared to what you'll find at maybe Harbor Freight or any other hardware store. and it works great. So now I'm just wiping this ring down so that all of the fumes that I'm going to subject it to actually hold to the ring. So I'm dipping this now in ammonia and salt so that it actually is a little soaked, and putting the lid on here creates a fume chamber that will actually turn this ring green and blue. And it's called a patina. So it should look pretty nice. But it actually takes a long time. I usually let it sit maybe overnight and through the next day before I'll take it out and it'll be finished. But every once in a while I'll just dip it back in just to make sure it's nice and wet. Check on the color, put it back. And usually just let it sit overnight after that. So it's got... can't see it too well there, but it's starting to get a little bit of color. And this is just a regular jar. I think this is actually a jar with ground ginger in it at one point. So here I've decided I'm not going to let it, I'm not going to give it any more time. I think the coloring's fine. I didn't want to wait any longer. So now I'm just wiping all the excess off there. It's going to take a little bit of the color off, but that's okay. You actually want to take some of that off before you finish the ring, or else it's not as doesn't adhere to the ring as well as the other stuff. So here's the ring now with that color before it's sealed in, and so I think it turned out pretty nice. It's got nice light green colors. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this it's sort of like a higher powered Dremel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this to actually just put my signature in the ring. And here is what I'm going to use next, is just this clear wood finish. I found that it works pretty well to seal the ring in the color, so that the color doesn't just wash off if you get any liquid on it. So really all I've done here is I've created a really high-tech paint room here, and it's just a cardboard box, and you know, just turn the ring in all different directions, let it dry, turn it again, spray it, let it dry, turn it again, spray it, and that's what I'm doing here. So that's basically it.